to record today, and I remembered to share the screen, so we're starting off better than yesterday.
It's progress.
Yeah, for sure. Yesterday was a Monday, and I acted like it was a Monday, so yeah. Yesterday wasn't too bad. I just kept forgetting to do stuff.
It was a lot of candy.
It's like running around all day, but by the end of the day,
Yeah. I guess we can do a quick review. It might not be a bad idea since Rome's kind of a big deal. Yeah. I was working on next week's presentations, and like heads up, next week is like Christian art, and then you get 1 day break and then more Christian art. I usually don't like doing Islamic art, but it was such a nice reprieve. But it only took a day. I'm like, man, back to Christian art. That's how it's going to be the rest of the semester. So, yeah. Whatever. Little recap of Rome. Yesterday, we went over the Republic period, which was when Rome was slowly beginning to build into its empire. Of course, the main ruler from that period was Julius Caesar. Does anyone remember a little bit about their architecture? Like what it fused? Mm-hmm. Very good. It's a fusion of Etruscan and Greek arts. That's pretty much this period in a nutshell. It's a fusion of Etruscan and Greek art and architecture. Of course, they did start using one very important building material. Anyone? Concrete. Yeah, concrete. It's mad for concrete yesterday, which allows them to do things like barrel vaults, growing vaults, and hemispherical domes. They also started off doing something kind of interesting with their sculpture. Does anyone remember? Individualized heads.
Yeah.
And they definitely honored their elderly. Of course, later on that changes. Yeah, this one's still weird to me. That changes whenever Augustus takes over. We also yesterday talked about Pompeii and the 4 styles of Pompeii. Does anyone remember the first style and its characteristic? What did the first style of painting in Pompeii try and do?
Oh,
No, that's the second one. Masonry style. It's all about trying to make fake looking, well, not fake looking, but real looking marble out of stucco. Brandon mentioned the second style, which is all about trying to create the illusion of depth. And then, of course, the third style was quite a bit different. It used a very small picture in the very center of a monochromatic wall. And the fourth style was a combo of all of the other styles put together. They also had wall mosaics and private portraits. I kept thinking about this one last night. I don't know why. It was bugging me. I think about things as I'm falling asleep. And the thing I was thinking about last night is the fact that this is a portrait of people right before they died in Pompeii, not Vesuvius. I'm like, they'd be dead today regardless, because like it was a long time ago. But it bugged me. It bugged me that we had a portrait of a husband and wife that died in Mount Vesuvius. I don't know why it bugged me, but it bugged me. Yeah, I had to mention that today because I thought about it for quite a while. Like, this is weird. Why is this bugging me? They'd be dead anyways. But it's really bugging me to know that they died because of a volcanic explosion. Yeah, it's still bugging me today, obviously. It's just grim. It's gruesome.
Yeah, it is.
Because like this is a celebratory photo. This is their wedding portrait. And
And then they die.
then they died. It's gruesome. So it bugs me. They also did still lifes very well. And of course, then we started the early empire, which is all about Pax Romana. Emperor Augustus installs that Roman peace and begins to use art to shape public opinion. Anyone remember what this one was trying to do?
Power.
Power and respect. Yes. Here's his wife, Livia. On her 9th birthday, he has the Areopagus made. Well, not really made, dedicated on her birthday. Anyone remember one of the political issues that the Areopagus was trying to address? Family, babies, because the birth rate was down. He's trying to encourage his followers to have more kids. What else was bugging me last night? I kept thinking about the Dionysus cult last night too. Yeah, I don't know. It was weird. They also used things like concrete to make aqueducts and domes, which we got our first example of a dome with Nero's Golden House. And that's pretty much where we ended. Nero, like it says there, was not popular. We talked about him. He is a pretty messed up person. He's not the most messed up Roman emperor, but he's up there. He's definitely there. He has a bunch of Christians killed and down because of a fire burns down a good chunk of the city, but then a lot of people think he actually set the fire because right afterwards he claimed all of that land is his and built a palace on it. So for obvious reasons, he wasn't popular with the people. Therefore, the new rulers that take over after Nero commits suicide, the Flavians, want to distance themselves from him. Some of the ways they do that are repurposing the land that Nero took for public use. I think you can probably figure out where I'm going here, Flavian Amphitheater. Yeah. But Vespasian, who is the first of the Flavians, is elected to take over after Nero, and then his 2 sons also rule after him. The Flavian dynasty does last a quarter century, which is not that long. It sounds long, but it's not that long. It just sounds long, but it's not. It's 25 years. But yeah. One of the first things that Vespasian does is commissions the Colosseum to be made. He takes back the land that Nero took from everyone else and has the Colosseum made. It provides jobs for a good chunk of people as well. So really just a public works project that not only was built for the purpose of mass entertainment for everyone, but gave people jobs, which is always good for the economy. It seated 50,000 people, meaning it was built with the intention of everyone attending. Not just the rich, not just the wealthy. The seating, however, was based on social status. So the wealthier you were, the better your seats would be. And usually you'd have a canopy over top to protect you from the sun. The poorer you were, the worse your seats would be. Interesting thing about the Colosseum is there are multiple entrances and exits. Each entrance and exit has a Roman numeral above it. There's 76 numbered gates. Those gates would apply to your seat number, so you knew where to go immediately, like a football stadium. And it provided for easy exits and entrances when something was going on. So really well thought out. It had vaulted corridors and lifts. The lifts were used to get animals up to the Colosseum floor safely. The lifts were also used for gladiators to enter dramatically. And of course, vaulted corridors help give you ample space to transport things in and out for the games as well. Unfortunately, most of the materials used to make the Colosseum were later repurposed to do other stuff. We're going to talk about that later on when it's repurposed and who repurposes it. But yeah, it's a giant thing of concrete. Concrete can be carved and shaped and turned into other stuff. So to save money and time, later on, emperors are going to repurpose pieces from the Colosseum for new sculptures. Cost effective. I don't blame them. Any questions about the Colosseum? Because I figure out, I think I forgot stuff. So if you ask a question, it might jog my memory. Question, thoughts? Anyone want to add something? It does have an engaged column. 3 rows of engaged columns and arcades. The columns are different on each level. I'm pretty sure that the bottom columns are Ionic, and then the top levels are Corinthian. But yeah. That takes us into Vespasian. Have I been calling him Vespian? Vespasian, sorry. Vespasian, his portraiture, it's quite a bit different from Augustus and Nero's styles. Both of those previous emperors wanted to be shown as idealized youthful figures. We used to have a Colossus of Nero. It would have been in front of his golden palace. However, that was knocked down for obvious reasons. Right after he commits suicide, and all of that is repurposed and shaped into other stuff. But the Flavians go back to the style that Julius Caesar used, in which you portray your actual facial features and show off your wisdom. And this is once again in order to distance himself from Nero, who preferred an idealized youthful figure. Totally a political statement there. He's showing the people that he is different from the corrupt Nero that came before him. Makes sense. I wouldn't want to be equated with Nero either. He did a lot of other stuff besides burning down half the town. Which, by the way, the people that lived in that half, they died in the fires. Yeah. Lots of people died. And then you had Christians crucified for it, so more people died. But yeah, a lot of people died with Nero. Not that they didn't with others. So yeah, Rome, quite corrupt. Now, I mentioned earlier with Livia, Augustus's wife, that she was showing off the style that women sported and the sculptural style that they preferred then. Now we're going to look at a female bust from the Flavian era, those 25 years. But this bust is quite a bit different. That is because around this time period, a drill was invented. Not like a power drill though, but like a drill that you could use to crank and it would drill into things like marble, which allows for the creation of much more stylized coiffures. This was the more popular hairstyle during the Flavian era for women to sport. It is quite intricate with braids in the back and many, many curls in the front. So this Flavian woman is showing us what the new fashion style is. You might notice, however, though, she still is portraying herself as youthful. So men went back to the wisdom side of things by showing off their wrinkles. Women, however, stuck with the idealized feminine version that was favored by the Greeks with Aphrodite. Which, I mean, it's not like they have to distance themselves from Nero. So why not? But yes, this would only be possible to do all of these intricate curls with a drill. I think you can probably see why. This sculpture is really cool to see. There's copies of it everywhere. To look inside the curls. Oh, so cool. You can see inside of them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's cool. Like, man, whoever commissioned that must have been really wealthy. That would take a lot of time to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, it's not her money either. It's got to be the family. Yeah, it's just weird to think about. Things that I think about randomly. Like, who commissioned it? Was your husband, a father? Why? We don't have many portraits of women, so I get curious. Like the last one we talked about was Empress. So, yeah. Another commission from his second son, Vespasian's second son, was the Arch of Titus. So Titus is Vespasian's eldest son. He dies shortly after he takes over as emperor. He only was emperor for 2 years. But his second son, Domitian, takes over after Titus and rules that remainder of the Flavian period. To celebrate Titus, though, Domitian has erected the Arch of Titus, named after, well, Titus. It is a triumphal arch. Triumphal arches become very popular and still are today to celebrate different things. Sometimes it's a war, sometimes it's just a person. This particular arch does celebrate the sacking of Jerusalem. So at this point in history, Rome takes over Jerusalem, and that was Titus's doing, and Titus takes a bunch of stuff from the Temple of Jerusalem, including the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah, and takes it back to Rome. And that is illustrated on this arch. We'll see close-ups of in a second. But yes, once again, we have concrete being employed to create this. It is a large Roman arch with some engaged Corinthian columns. So once again, a merging of Roman style with Greek accents. And of course, like I mentioned, on the interior, after walking through the arch, there are a bunch of low relief sculptures detailing and illustrating that narrative of Titus going to Jerusalem, which is a bit of a contested thing. When it was first erected, Rome was quite proud of all of the goods that it brought back from Jerusalem. However, today it's not a popular thing to do that and celebrate it, because I mean, people did die in the fighting and you stole stuff. So yeah, but that's not important for this class. It's just another one of those things I think about. Just getting a lot of that today. I've had a lot of thoughts lately about art history, so I've been reading a lot of them. Here are the different columns that pop up around this time period in Rome. You might notice there's a few new ones. That's because Rome changes stuff. In Rome, from Tuscans, they borrow the Tuscan column. You might notice it's very similar to the Doric column, however, without that fluting. So occasionally they'll use the Tuscan column, occasionally they'll use the Doric column, occasionally they use the Ionic column, sometimes even the Corinthian column. Sometimes they combine the Corinthian and Ionic columns to make the composite style. So you might notice that Rome is definitely tweaking stuff. And that is going to continue as we move forward. They're going to take Greek, Etruscan, and their own thoughts and merge them all together to make these new hybrid forms of architectural design, which is kind of art history in a nutshell. Stealing from everywhere and then tweaking it to fit your own needs. How it's going to be the rest of the semester. You might notice that trend. This is literally what keeps happening. So here are some of those details that I mentioned earlier, the relief sculptures from inside the Arch of Titus. This is, of course, the menorah from the temple, and on their backs is the Ark of the Covenant, and they are bringing it back to Rome. Of course, both of these objects were lost partially through this process later on. So very important artifacts for Christians and Jewish people gone. It's another reason why people don't particularly like celebrating this fact. Yeah, it happened in history. Some of the pieces obviously have broken off because they were entirely in the round. Like there was once a dude here, he broke off Um, Anything you might notice about these figures? Are they really detailed? Do they reference classical sculpture? What are you thinking?
I think they were really detailed.
Probably.
Like extreme.
Yeah. Can anyone think of a particular building in Greece that we looked at that had a similar theme or style? I can't, but I'm extremely invested in this now. Starts with P.
Has all the columns, yeah, the
Oh, like, I know
Parthenon.
what it looks like.
The Parthenon.
Yeah.
She's
I
trying
was
to
like,
better.
Zeus or something, it's always, yeah.
Oh, Grace, you're missing a good one. It has all the columns and we're back here drawing it, but it's the Parthenon. So the Panathenaic procession of the Parthenon frieze has almost an identical setting. So very inspired by classical Greece. However, I do think that they tweaked it a little bit this is just my personal opinion, you can disagree. I don't think it's as well done as the classical version. It looks, yeah, the classical version, they made it just one level of people. This one, they're trying to show depth and it gives off the crowded effect. I mean, they're trying to show depth, so I can appreciate that.
Stack.
Yeah,
You
they're
know,
stacking.
Kind of
Mhm,
going into the
mhm.
piece around.
Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate it. And this is just,
It's different.
I don't know. This is another thing that I just think about sometimes. Anyways, hi Empire. We're moving on from the Flavians' rule on to the High Empire. This is the peak of the Roman Empire, which happens under Trajan and Hadrian and some other guys that aren't nearly as important, which is why I didn't mention them. Trajan and Hadrian are basically Emperor Augustus and Caesar once again. So really powerful, impactful rulers that basically demand your respect. They don't demand it, but you just want to give reverence to them because of their accomplishments. Well-spoken, commanding officials. You just respect them. Also, Rome was really wealthy during this time period. And usually when people are making a lot of money, they're going to attribute that to whoever's leading the society at that time and think, oh, it's because so-and-so's in charge. That's why everyone's so rich right now. So that's another reason why Trajan and Hadrian are so popular. Trajan, Hadrian, Caesar, and Augustus are like the big four emperors of Rome. Of course, Caesar happens during the Republic period, Augustus during the early empire, and these guys are high. After them, it kind of goes downhill. Yeah. This is around the 2nd century that we're talking about right now. It's also the time when Rome is at its biggest before it breaks apart, which is why I said it kind of goes downhill. Trajan is another person that after Nero's assassination, Trajan was not a fan of Nero. So he's also going to try and distance himself from that. It's just like, so there's this theory that Roman emperors choose to associate themselves with certain emperors because they're known for being good and distance themselves from others that are known for being horrible at their jobs. So this is another example of an emperor that did not want to be associated to Nero because Nero is like the first big bad one that we've had so far. There's going to be others, but yeah. Poor Nero. He is also the first Spanish-born emperor. Both Trajan and Hadrian are from Spain. And they're two of the big four. But yeah, he did prioritize military, another way to make someone popular, especially if the military controls half the government. Remember the plebes from yesterday? Yeah, they're military. And to honor them, he set up an entire colony for the war veterans in Timgad, or present-day Algeria, which is based on a castrum plan. A castrum is the way that the Roman military arranged their camps. We also talked about this last week with Hippodamus's city, which is all centrally planned with very specific block sizing for everything. So it's pretty similar. The forum is located in the very center of the city, and your basilica and temple are arranged around that. Right next to that is the amphitheater. And then around that were very specific city blocks. The closer you were to the center, the wealthier you were, the further away, the poorer. However, it didn't last long because the city grew outside of that original scale. You can kind of see it off center now. The forum's kind of not in the center anymore. So yeah, it didn't work out either. So this is going to come up again later on, but specifically building cities and requiring things to be exact never works because population grows, and they don't account for that. Washington, D.C., when it was originally made, tried to do that as well. It didn't work. Things change. But I get the appeal. It's very aesthetic to look at. You can still see the very square nature of the city itself, and they tried to kind of stick to it for a while. And I can imagine it was probably quite nice to walk down. You can see the main streets are a little bit larger than the side streets to allow for pedestrian traffic. It makes sense. I get it. It's well thought out, but also not well thought out in the same sense. I mean, if you're wanting to be specific. If you're okay with fluctuation, then it's a great idea. But yeah, Trajan, that's one of the first things he does is to build that city for veterans. Makes veterans happy. Another thing that Trajan does, well, actually, it's kind of Trajan, done by the architects Apollodorus in Damascus. They'll come up again later, specifically Apollodorus, because he's going to make Hadrian mad. And then I'm dying. But yeah, these two architects, they build the Forum of Trajan. Forums, remember, are like marketplaces, and basilicas and temples go off of the forums. They're most commonly in the middle of the city. But yeah, they build his forum, which looks like a giant marketplace. It's in your book if you want to look at it. I left it out because it's just a market. It looks like a mall, honestly, a really old-fashioned mall. But he also, in the very center of his, well, not really center, but like towards the front, you would walk through an arch, and right on the other side of that arch would be this column, which celebrates two of the campaigns that Trajan fought in. It is a very tall column, which has a continuous frieze wrapping around it, starting from the bottom to the top. That is 625 feet long. The frieze itself has 2,500 different characters carved onto it. Of course, Trajan is a repeated image throughout because it is his story. Now, interesting enough, the bands that are really high up are actually thicker and the carvings are a bit deeper so that when you're at the bottom, you can still read it. Yeah. It's also a mausoleum at the bottom. Trajan's ashes were put in. Now, if you want to see a replica of this and you're ever in London, Victoria and Albert Museum did a plaster cast of it. So you can see that in case you ever go to London. Which, I mean, if you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, they have plaster casts of almost all of the really famous world monuments. And they literally use those monuments and cast them in plaster, like molded it. So it's pretty cool. It's called the Hall of Plaster Casts, and they almost got rid of all of them. They were going to get rid of all of them. But then somebody's like, no, I'm going to build you guys an entire room for this because these are kind of important. Because some of those plaster molds are better preserved than these because this is outside.
Yeah.
So it's going to be our best model of what it originally looked like. Yeah, that's just another little side note. But here's a detail of one of the, well, kind of two of the frieze brands. Down here is, of course, Trajan. He's the bigger figure. It is like his story, so it makes sense. He's not always the bigger figure, but yeah, they're pointing him out here. In his two campaigns that he led against the Dacian people, which were a smaller group of people he conquered. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about this. It's a lot of fighting. You can see the lined up soldiers as they're marching, as well as the different battles that they're fighting along the way. It is really impressive. I think it's more impressive for what it is than what it looks like. I don't know. Also, just my opinion. Getting a lot of opinions today. I don't usually do that, but today getting a lot of opinions. Of course, throughout the story, Trajan is shown as the competent military commander. So really, once again, using art to show off or convince people to think a specific way about their leader, which is a common theme throughout Roman art. Now, I did include the Market of Trajan. I didn't think I did. Also done by Apollodorus in Damascus. Here's that forum of markets that Trajan had made. It is a semicircle and it is two-story, meaning there are stores on the bottom and stores on the top. You would enter into each individual store through the arch, and if you wanted to get to the second story, you could enter into one of the square doors and walk up the stairs to it. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It reminds me of like open air malls, if you've ever been to them. There's one in New Mexico, I can't remember where. There's some in Texas. Like San Marcos has those open air malls. It's built like that. But yeah, once again by Apollodorus in Damascus. Those were the favored architects and sculptors by Trajan. Now, the next guy, Hadrian, is not going to like them, like I mentioned. But here's the inside of that market, in case you're curious what it looked like inside. The arches continue on the interior as well. It's pretty well preserved considering how old it is. Hadrian didn't get along with Apollodorus in Damascus because Hadrian thought he too was an architect. I am the emperor, I am a military commander, I am an orator, and I am an artist. Yes, that is Hadrian. So he butted heads with Apollodorus in Damascus. Damascus was like, okay, whatever, you're the emperor, I don't care, I don't want to die. Apollodorus pushed back. Therefore, Apollodorus had his head removed. But similarly to the Flavian style, and Trajan did this too, he liked to appear more mature in his portraits, once again distancing themselves from Nero. Don't want to be Nero. He's most famous for ordering the construction of the Pantheon, the other P building that I always get confused with the Parthenon. I don't know when that's going to stop, but I always get them mixed up. Yeah. They're very different. But they both start with P. He is our second Spaniard emperor and our last one. And I honestly find him a little bit more interesting than like Trajan. I think Trajan is probably the better emperor of the two, but considering what he did. But Hadrian, because he viewed himself as an artist, I just think he's a little bit more interesting. And he definitely pushed the envelope on what he could do with Greek styles in his architecture. Like, this is going to be Greek, but it's also mine. He's mine. He took artistic license, which I appreciate. And we're going to see it momentarily. But first, here is what he looked like himself. Once again, it is an individualized portrait. He doesn't show himself as like a wrinkled old man, but still, he's got that overly bulbous nose, which was not preferred in the time. really showing off what he is. He also made the beard popular. You can see he popularized the beard. That became in fashion when he was in charge. I don't know. Time. In some cultures, noses are broken because people faced them afterwards, but this one I would guess would be time. This used to be part of an entire body, but this is just what we have left. There's better portraits of Hadrian that did not have the nose broken. I just used the same one from your book. But there are some on Google that you can find that don't have broken noses, because those are the first ones that popped up. Actually, a little while to find this one. Like I mentioned, most famous for the Pantheon, which is a temple dedicated to all of the gods and goddesses. It used to be above ground, now it's kind of underground because asphalt paving raised the road level. It used to have stairs that led up to the temple, just like most Greek and Roman temples. However, once again, this one only had a front entrance. You would enter in through the portico or porch area, which has Corinthian columns. However, these Corinthian columns are a little different. They didn't have fluting. Most Corinthian columns have fluting. It has a frieze and pediment. However, none of it is decorated with relief sculpture, which is more of an Etruscan style. So once again, we're seeing a fusion of Roman and Etruscan. If you remember, the Etruscan column didn't have fluting either. So both of them being combined. However, instead of your rectangular building in the back, he chose a round building with a large dome on top. The actual temple itself is in the structure of a large circle. It makes a circle. It really does. The dome cylinder is 142 feet in diameter, and the floor to the dome's peak is also 142. So that's what I mean. It makes a perfect circle. Yeah. In 118 CE is pretty cool. Later on, domes will be made on squares. I think I've mentioned that before. Most domes are made on squares because squares are very stable structures to put a circle on top of. I guess we were going to watch the video. I thought I had another picture. Sorry. Oh, now I remember. I wanted to watch this video because it takes you inside and talks about the coifers and the oculus, which are kind of interesting.
We're sitting in the piazza, the square in front of the Pantheon.
This is the best preserved ancient Roman monument. And yet, look at the sense of age, look at the weathering, look at the way in which its history is revealed through its surface. It's been attacked. Its original bronze fittings have been ripped off. Look at the numerous holes, for instance, in the pediment to tell of all of the different purposes that this building has been put to. Originally a temple to the gods, then sanctified and made into a church. Now, of course, it's also a major tourist attraction. This is a building that has had just...
That's the other thing, is this used to be used as a Christian church. So when they did that, they completely removed all of the statuary of the pagan gods and replaced it with Christian imagery. So really changing the purpose.
A tremendously complex history, and you can see it all over its surface.
We're seeing it very differently than anyone in antiquity would have seen it.
In fact, we're standing many feet higher than we would have been in the ancient world. Rome accumulated elevation from the debris of history. Once you would have stepped up to the porch of the Pantheon. Now we actually lie downhill.
And the space in front of the Pantheon was framed by a colonnade.
The colonnade and the other buildings that would have originally surrounded this building would have obscured the barrel on the side. And so that we would have only seen this very traditional temple front.
Exactly, it would have been something very familiar, and the surprise was what happened as you approached the threshold.
I have to tell you that I'm absolutely in love with those massive columns. They're supported by these enormous marble bases. They rise up unarticulated without any fluting, and then in these massive fragments of what were originally marble Corinthian capitals. These are monoliths, they're single pieces of stone. Unlike Greek columns, they were not segmented, they were not cut, and they were imported from Egypt, which was symbolic of Rome's power over most of the Mediterranean under the Emperor Hadrian, who was responsible for the construction of this building. So let's go in, let's go under the porch, let's go through those massive bronze doors. We just walked in under the strictly rectilinear porch, and then the space opens up.
Opens up into this vast circular space.
The width of the building and the height of the building completely fills my field of vision. And it is, in a sense, an expression of the limits of my sight. Unlike a basilica, this is a radial building. That is to say that it has a central point and radiates outward from that central point. But what's fascinating about this building is it's not a traditional radial structure in that the point would be on the floor. The central point, its focus, is midway between the floor and the ceiling and midway between its walls. It is large enough and geometrically perfect enough to accommodate a perfect sphere.
And as soon as you walk in, you notice that there's a kind of obsession with circles, with rectangles, with squares, with those kinds of perfect geometrical shapes.
This is a structure that is concerned with the ideal geometries, but it also locates our place within those geometries.
But the experience of being in this space is anything but static.
No, it's really dynamic, in fact. And one of the causes of that is if we move our eye up the columns, we can see that they're beautifully aligned with the frieze of false windows that are just above them. But then all of that does not align with the dome.
That's right, they don't align with the coffers that we see in the dome. What that does is creates this feeling that the barrel that the dome rests on is independent from the dome and almost makes it feel as though the dome could rotate.
That complex visual relationship between the dome and the decorative structures in the barrel remind us that this actual structural system here is dependent on concrete and not these decorative columns that we see on the interior.
Exactly, there's thick barrel of concrete that supports the dome. Because the dome pushes down and out, Roman architects had to think about how to support the weight and pressure of the dome. And one of the things that's doing that are the thick concrete walls of the barrel.
You know, the Romans had really perfected concrete, and this is one of the buildings that shows what was possible. This is shaping space because concrete could be continuous. It could be built upward continuously with wooden forms, which would then be removed and then open this space up.
So they got so specific, this is more concrete advertisement. They got so specific with their concrete that they figured out what rocks to use to mix in to either make it sturdier or softer and lighter. So if you wanted something sturdier, you would use really large rocks and mix it in with the concrete. If you wanted something lightweight, you would add like sand. Very specialized with their concrete, which allows them to do things like this. I like that. Sometimes I don't like their videos. Sometimes their videos get on my nerves. But I like that one because it does get so in depth with working, particularly with the outside, which no one pays attention to it. Now, Hadrian, I feel like really was able to accomplish this partially because he was so obsessed with architecture. I think that's one of the reasons, and this is all personal opinion and speculation as well. I think the reasons why he was able to come up with this idea. Once again, Apollodorus and the other guy who doesn't die, Damascus, help him build this. However, Hadrian quickly has Apollodorus beheaded because Apollodorus didn't like Hadrian's pumpkins. So Hadrian wanted a different kind of dome built. He wanted a dome which was more of a pumpkin shape rather than a round shape, so a bit flatter. He thought that was more visually appealing. Apollodorus, however, and he's the one that called it pumpkins. Apollodorus very much upset Hadrian when he called his domes pumpkins. And Apollodorus refused to make Hadrian's pumpkins. So Hadrian had Apollodorus beheaded and Hadrian made his pumpkins. Yes. So no more Apollodorus from now on. We're done with him. But Hadrian did build an entire villa or palace for himself using his own blueprints and ideas. And the villa itself has got some cool things going on, such as a really large pool, which you might recognize from the cartoon Hercules, that is surrounded by sculptures and has this intersecting arcade. So it has a flat side and an arch, a flat side and an arch, and it just goes around the entire pool. In between those columns would have been a sculpture. Underneath each arch, all of the sculptures were Greek, well, Roman copies of Greek sculptures done in marble, and the columns are Corinthian columns. This had never been done before, this alternating arches. This is all Hadrian. And I think it looks nice. This is all my opinion. Some people do not think it looks nice. Some people were irritated because it's not Greek. It's very much him doing his own thing. Other artists and architects will start doing this later, being inspired by him. The pool itself does end in his pumpkin. On the opposite end, it has its pumpkin dome, which is right here. So you can kind of see it's not really a true dome. It's a bit flatter. This is the inside of it. The rest of it's broken off. But yeah. Poor Apollodorus. Although, don't ever insult the emperor. I feel like that's common sense. Don't sell him, because he literally outright told him, I'm not going to make your pumpkins. Like, don't do that. Actually, quotes that are in your book of other people telling Apollodorus not. If you read that, it's a pretty interesting excerpt. Other stuff that comes out from the High and Late Empire period. This is located in Jordan, Al-Khazneh. It's really cool. So it is similar to those Egyptian rock-cut tombs that we looked at a long time ago. However, instead of Egyptian motifs, it has some Greek motifs mixed in with obviously very Roman ideas or interpretations of it. So we still have Corinthian columns, once again, no fluting. Some of the columns are engaged. Some of them are freestanding columns. Of course, none of these are needed for support because it's carved into the wall. It's just a giant carving. It would have had sculptures in high relief on each side. And then you'd walk up the steps and enter into the temple. Above it was a pediment and frieze with decorative sculpture. However, that pediment is not taking up the entire length of the building. It is only for those 4 non-engaged columns. Normal Greek temples, the pediment would cover the entire front side. I think we can see it's a small triangle there. And then there is a second story, which is unheard of in Greek art. They did not do that, with a tholos and an interrupted pediment. This is the first time we've seen a pediment that is not complete, which also has sculpture. I included the interior of this because it's amazing, but your book doesn't. But yeah, this is a great example of in late empire, well, high and late empire art. At this point, Roman architects and artists are not afraid to break the Greek rules. If you remember when we were going over Greek architecture, they had set rules and mathematical formulas that they followed. The Romans here are proving outright, yeah, we'll take your stuff, but we're going to do whatever we want with it. The inside. Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
This is just the rock. It's really impressive. It was a temple, obviously. But yeah, it's really impressive. I thought it was neat. I like rock though. So yeah. Now the Antonines follow after Hadrian. Hadrian ends up adopting a son when he's 50. Well, the son was 51 to ensure who would be the next emperor. It became a kind of common theme to adopt someone. Hadrian had his own kids, but he didn't want his kids to take over. He wanted Antinous Pius to take over. So to ensure that, he adopted Antinous Pius when Antinous was 51. Then in turn, Antinous adopted Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Versus, who were already also adults at that time, to ensure that they would take over when he died. It makes sense. Like, you're like, I don't think my kids can do this job. I'm gonna adopt you. I mean, you'd probably take over anyways, regardless, but this will make the transition a little smoother and avoid wars. So I'm gonna adopt you so no one can contest that you should be emperor. And you're gonna adopt these two people. Hadrian literally told Pius who to adopt. So he ensured the next 3 emperors and who they'd be. Not a bad idea. It's really not. It didn't work out because Lucius and Marcus ended up becoming co-emperors, which I have an issue with emperor. Can't spell it. I learned that because I kept doing it. I also can't type the word "the." I type T-E-H because, yeah, I just typed faster that way. But yeah, I learned things when I was doing all these. But yeah, that's a weird one. But you can see the issue with Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Versus being co-emperors right off the bat. I think normal people can see the issue with that. Co-emperors. That's not gonna work. Anyways, Pius, when he died, his 2 sons, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Versus, had a column dedicated to his rule. We have the base of the column left, or the pedestal that it sat on, and that pedestal has some low and high relief sculpture on it. One of the scenes, which is the scene that's frontal here, reunites Antonius Pius with his wife Faustina. Man, it just gets harder from now on too. Faustina had already been dead 20 years. So this is really like saying that now that he died, they're reunited together in the afterlife. And there's a whole lot of mythological elements going on and symbolism with the different figures, which I'm not going to go into because it's not super pertinent with art history. But yeah, if you want to. On the other side is the more interesting one. It shows a swirling scene in the center is Antonius Pius fighting a battle against some enemies. But this is an interesting compositional choice. We haven't seen this from Rome. We've seen this from like Egypt on pictographs, but not from Rome. It's literally a circular composition on a flat surface. Normally Rome would do this, where everything is on a flat ground line and you see the story unfolding. Here, there is no ground line. So we are also not just breaking from tradition with architecture, we're also breaking from tradition in sculptures, and it can be assumed paintings as well. Now, like I mentioned, Antonius Pius adopted Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Versus to take over. One of those names you might be familiar with, the other one you probably haven't heard of. So you can figure out how this is gonna go. Which one have you heard of before? You've heard of both? I hadn't heard of Lucius Versus. I have heard of Marcus Aurelius. He's kind of a big deal. He's like another version of Augustus. He liked to model himself after people like Hadrian, Trajan, and Augustus that came before. He's also known as being a really great emperor. We only have this sculpture of him though. And the only reason why we have it is because people thought it was Constantine for a really long time. So they didn't melt it down. Why might the later Christians that take over Rome not want to melt down a statue of Constantine? Anyone? He legalized Christianity, yeah. So in reverence to Constantine, they didn't melt this one. There was a period in time when bronze was in short order, so they melted down a good chunk of the bronze statues. If they had known this was Marcus Aurelius, they would have been melted down too. But this is a pretty popular compositional style that's going to pop up quite a bit later in art history. Well, it's going to pop up again with Constantine and with late antiquity and with early medieval art. It's a pretty popular theme, but it starts here, and that is the equestrian statue. That's what this is called, equestrian statue, because of the horse. So here, Marcus Aurelius is riding a horse. There is something wrong, though. Who knows what's wrong? Who's bigger, the horse or Marcus? He is bigger than the horse. Yes, that is because they wanted him to be the focal point, not the horse. Originally, there would have been someone begging for mercy underneath the horse's hoof, but that is lost. Yeah. He does have his hand out in a similar manner to one other statue that we've talked about. Does anyone remember which one?
Yeah,
Augustus, yes. So referencing Augustus of Prima Portis statue, which was all about respect. And of course, he too is demanding respect a little bit more violently since there was a person under the horse's hoof. He's also supposed to be shown as giving clemency in this portrait because he didn't kill the person under the horse's hoof. Good job. However, upon closer inspection, there's something interesting happening with his face. What do you guys think of his facial expression?
That's very sad.
He's sad. Why, I don't know, but it does look sad. So it does show a bit of character and humanism rather than just emperor. Something that became popular while Marcus Aurelius was in charge, sarcophagi. Originally in Rome, it was popular to cremate yourself. It was popular with the Greeks and the Etruscans as well. However, when Christianity was gaining traction, people started wanting to have their ashes stored in sarcophagi. They were still being cremated for a long time, but they wanted sarcophagi. It was a wealth status kind of thing. Christians, however, because of religion, it's frowned upon to get cremated. It kind of still is today with older Christians. Like my mom refuses to be cremated. My dad's like, I don't care. But yeah, it's just that whole idea of like afterlife and body preservation, kind of similar to the Egyptians in thought process. Thanks to Christianity, sarcophagi were popular and people wanted to buy them. So much so that they had them mass produced. So I mentioned yesterday warehouses started popping up to mass produce sculptures. One such kind of sculpture that gained traction were, of course, the sarcophagus. There were two different styles of sarcophagi. There was a Western style and the Eastern style. Western style made in like Italy, Eastern style made in Asia Minor, which will later become Byzantium. There were distinct differences, however, between them. The Western style did not have decoration on the top, but only on the sides. The Eastern style tended to have sculptures on top as well, similar to the Etruscan style. That has to do with the way it was stored, though. How they stored these sarcophagi is they had carved out sections in tombs and mausoleums to just shove them into. The Eastern style with the carvings on top required you to have a bigger hole. But yeah, since these things were mass produced, most of the imagery is pretty generic. Later on, Christians will do the imagery with, of course, biblical stories. However, with the pagan Greeks, I know it's so sad to say pagan, but pagan Greeks, they included mythological scenes such as the one here. Here is an example of the Eastern style, just to give you an idea. It's very similar to Etruscan, well, not really in style, but subject matter, which is a woman laying on a couch. You talked about the man laying on the couch. It's a pretty common theme with sarcophagi. So obviously for this, you would need to have a bigger hole, which usually required more money. And once again, it's covered in mythological scenery. Sarcophagi. We're going to talk about them a lot later on. Well, from now on, we're going to talk about sarcophagi a lot. Yeah, late empire is the last bit for Rome, obviously. And that is sparked with the Severan dynasty. The Severans take over when Marcus Aurelius's son Commodus dies. The Severans, or Septimius Severus, was an African general who took over. After him, we are going to have the period of the generals for a little bit. You'll understand. It's a downhill from here. Downhill slide. And we're going to see some more murder. Actually, a lot of more murder from here on out. Most of these emperors don't live long from now on. Marcus Aurelius is the last one to really rule for a good amount of time. Until Constantine. He rules a long time. So here is Septimius Severus with his wife, who was a priestess, which is kind of why she has that little medallion on her head. And their two sons. Yes, there used to be two. There's only one now. Here's where the murder starts. This is called a tondo portrait. A tondo is just a circle. It's a fancy name for a circle. This is a portrait done in a circle to show off the family. This is a interesting scene for family. It kind of harkens back to that Arapakis design, which really makes family look important. Everyone looks happy. I mean, she's legit smiling. That's amazing in portraiture. But his two sons' names are Caracalla and Geta. Geta's face has been removed. That is because when Caracalla takes over, he has Geta murdered and all of his images removed. The Romans are really good at doing that. They're really the first group to successfully remove someone from history. The Egyptians tried, but you can still kind of find some stuff here and there. The Romans, they did it good. Poor Geta. Geta was young too when he was murdered, but Caracalla was worried. Yeah. This is the first image of, a portrait painting of an emperor. You might notice some interesting characteristics about Septimius. Anyone want to point them out? Please don't say skin color, because I'm talking more about like face.
Cheekbones.
He has prominent cheekbones.
His eyes.
His eyes.
Forehead. Just his whole appearance.
His whole appearance looks a bit jolly and cheerful thanks to the highlighting added. They also added in white to his beard, symbolizing age and wisdom. He looks like a nice guy. Do I know if he was a nice guy? No. But he looks nice. They look happy. Poor Geta. So here is the son, Septimius' son, that takes over. Very different example of a portrait. Very different from his father. He does not look jolly or kind at all. This is that, by the way, that idea of removing all imagery of someone or their complete existence is called damnatio memori. Damn the memory. Yeah. It has a name. But yeah, and I forgot his A. I mean, But yes, he preferred in his sculptures to appear in heroic nudity. If you remember back to classical Greece, the heroes are usually entirely nude, very muscular, young. He liked that. So yeah, Nero. Kind of a similar mentality too with this one. However, instead of having normal hair, he did prefer showing off his natural curls and his beard, rather than a generic head. He also chose a very interesting composition style, which you can already tell by his face. But in his full body, because we don't have the full body, he would be holding like a weapon or something and kind of looking back over his shoulder with that nodded brow expression. Yeah, looking over his shoulder. He died being stabbed in the back. So a lot of art historians like to consider his posture a bit of foreshadowing on how he died. And yeah, stabbed in the back. A little ironic that he chose that, but yes, his facial expression. What do you guys think about it? What do you? He looks angry to me. A lot of historians think he looks worried. Concentrating. Yeah, that's a good word, concentration. But yeah, I mean, he was so scared of his brother that he had him killed. He's a strange guy.
And
He said his brother was.
Paranoia?
Brother, right?
Huh?
He said his brother was younger.
He was younger, yeah.
so maybe,
He was paranoid.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that goes into psychology. I've been thinking about that too a lot. But yeah, and that takes us into the Soldier Emperors. Caracalla didn't last very long because he was a bit paranoid with how he ruled things. So the general murdered him, and then they took over. General after general after general took over as emperor. Some of them literally only lasted like 2 weeks. It was short. So we go through a lot of emperors, which sucks for the government because they literally cannot get anything done, but it's great if you're in the coin minting business or portrait busts. Because with every new emperor, the first things they did were have portrait busts and coins commissioned to show off, I'm the new emperor. Because remember, Romans like to use imagery to control people's mindsets. So there's ups and downs to this business. Anyways, because of all of the short-lived emperors and everyone saying they were emperor now, it did plunge Rome into civil war. Yeah, makes sense. A lot of this makes sense. One of the rulers, Trajan Decius, took obviously Trajan's name because Trajan's a good emperor. Yeah. He wasn't emperor long enough to pull off any architectural feats. In fact, we don't really have much architecture from the soldier emperor era because none of them were emperor long enough to do anything big. But like I said, we do have a lot of portrait busts. Every single one had a different bust made as well as a different coin. This one, Trajan Decius, he is very famous for persecuting Christians. It was his thing. Like, it kind of died off like persecuting Christians, and he became emperor and he hyped it up. He started all over again. Since Nero, no one had persecuted Christians as much as he did. Wasn't an emperor very long, but that's what he's known for. Now, what do you guys think of his face? He looks old, yeah. He looks tired, worn down. He kind of makes you want to pity him. That's the vibe I get when I look at him. I'm like, I want to feel sorry for you, but then I hear about what you did and then I don't. Yeah. But yeah, bust. Here's another soldier emperor. This is a fun one. Trebonius Gaius. Gaius is famous for his strength. Hence the heroic nude statue. He, however, was not your normal like sword battle strength. No, he was a wrestler. Hence the shape. In wrestling, things that are really important are a strong trunk, which is why we have a very large trunk here for a human body. He does still show off his age, his face is wrinkled, but he's really emphasizing his build as a wrestler, which he was extremely proud of. He would wrestle boars as an emperor. Yeah. He would show people that he could do that even though he was old. The interesting thing here is that despite the fact that he's like in heroic nudity, he's in that orator pose, which just juxtaposes it in a weird way. Nobody mentions that in art history. It's just something that I noticed that seems off. Yeah, and he's wearing shoes. Shoes. Yeah, once again, didn't live too long. One particular piece of architecture that does come about in this period is the Baalbek Temple of Venus. It's not a huge temple, but it does kind of take on the original Pantheon scope in an interesting way, merging it more with a tholos structure. Tholos are those round structures. So really ignoring a lot of classical rules, but still incorporating classical motifs. So we have our porch with the very miniature pediment, and this is all that's left of it, so I tried to find a reconstruction. Your book had this, and I couldn't really imagine it based off of that because there's not enough left. So reconstruction did it. A miniature pediment that didn't take up the entire porch, also very Roman, not Greek. No sculptural frieze motifs, but the weird thing is how they did the roof. You'll notice it has these semicircles scalloped out on the edges. So there was scalloping all around the edge of this, which I think looks neat. But it's the only building that did this, which is why it's mentioned, because it's very much breaking from tradition. Once again, Corinthian columns. The base also mirrored that scalloping in the roof. It did have a small dome on top. Overall, we're entering into a period of time which is quite eccentric. They're just trying to do new stuff and do everything all at once. So we have a dome, we have a porch, we have Corinthian columns, we have scalloping. It's all exaggerated. Remember Hellenistic period. History repeats itself. But yes, that is our few bits of sculpture that we actually have from the soldier emperors. And it's eccentric. Not that the last piece of architecture that we looked at wasn't that rock cut building. It was eccentric. Okay, eventually the Roman emperors end up giving up, really. And Rome declares that it will rule in a tetrarchy. Tetrarchy literally translates to rule of four. So they come up with this system that there are going to be two Augusti, named after Augustus, and two Caesars that work under them. And they all work together to rule the eastern and western halves of Rome. Eventually, this is going to lead to an entire split of Rome between Byzantium and Rome, which will lead to the entire downfall of the Roman Empire. Like, it can't deal with invaders at this point. But it's an interesting concept. So those Augusti are the older members, and they made sure the Caesars obeyed them by forcing the Caesars to marry their daughters, the Augusti daughters. So really linking them all together in marriage. It's weird. Like, I get it, but it's weird. And it obviously wasn't successful. It only lasted for this one round with Diocletian. As soon as Diocletian, the leading Augusti of Rome, he retired. Like, I'm done. I'm done being emperor. I'm going to retire. He retires to his villa, and then after that, everything falls apart. And they go back into civil war. Huh? I know, it's better than getting stabbed, but it was literally peaceful. the Civil War stopped when Diocletian took over. And then he retires and they start again. Yeah. I'm pretty sure probably a lot of people were angry when he retired. But anyways, we do have group portraits of the tetrarchs being made because, I mean, we still need portraiture of the Roman emperor, but now we have 4 emperors. So group portraits, yay. You might notice interesting things about all of these though. Just a side note, the Augusti, who were the main rulers of the East and West, and also the older ones, they have beards. Caesars, the younger, don't. What do you guys think of these? So the first time I saw these, I thought it looked like they were like holding on to each other because they were afraid. It's not what it's supposed to be. It's just yeah, it's very minimal, close together. They're all identical. And it's their facial expressions and postures that make me think that. But that's not what it's supposed to be. The linking of arms is supposed to show that they're working together. Yeah, they have their hands on their swords. I know, the whole posture makes me think they look afraid. Like, oh, come on, we gotta get ready, run. But that's not what it is supposed to be. But yes, many of these group portraits were made and posted around the empire to show off the new rulers. Like I mentioned, Diocletian retired to his private villa, which is in your book if you are interested in it. It's kind of impressive. He basically made a fortress, like not just a house, but a fortress. He had walls put up and like barriers. I don't know what he was preparing for. But yeah, after he retired, Civil War followed for 20 years until Constantine I came out as the winner. Later on known as Constantine the Great. He ends up conquering, because what ends up happening is the guy that takes over the East and the guy that takes over the West, they don't agree. And they want to be just sole emperor again. So Constantine, the son of the emperor of the East, wants to reunite everything. And he did. He ended up reuniting all of Rome into one. When he does that, he moves the capital of Rome to Byzantium, renames it Constantinople. It becomes the new Rome, present-day Istanbul, where the Hagia Sophia is. Yeah. He moves Rome. Eventually, like I said, this leads to a complete split because Rome's too big. And yeah, it just doesn't function. He does legalize Christianity. That's kind of what he's known most for. We are going to talk more about him tomorrow too, because yeah, we're talking about Christian art tomorrow, and he's the one that legalizes it. In 325, he makes Christianity the de facto religion, making it the primary religion of Rome, denouncing paganism. He also has triumphal arches built. Kind of a normal thing though, not really different. His triumphal arches don't really celebrate wars so much as celebrate him and his renown for legalizing Christianity. I have issues with the Arch of Constantine, but that's just me. I think most people don't. But to make the, which by the way, this is a triple triumphal arch, I think you can see that, with engaged Corinthian columns still, we're still doing that. But it has those relief sculptures on it. Most of the sculptures on this were taken from other monuments. You remember how I said with the Colosseum, they like stole stuff from it? So Constantine stole sculptures from Augustus's things that he did, from Hadrian's stuff, from Trajan's stuff, from Marcus Aurelius' stuff. You might catch a theme. Those are all really like good emperors. He didn't steal stuff from people like Nero. That's what I'm getting at. He stole the stuff from the good emperors and repurposed it. He had the heads recarved to his head. That was it. And put it on this arch. Yeah. So that's my issue, is like, I don't like that he defaced the others, but I understand why. He stole stuff from famous monuments of good emperors to associate himself to them. So a continuation of that theme of using art for politics purposes, political purposes, I mean. Here's a close-up of the Arch of Constantine, well, part of it. Like I said, he changed the heads. That's really all he changed. Everything else is the same. Here in the center on the throne would be Constantine distributing Largesse. If you're wondering what Largesse is, don't worry. I had to look it up because I didn't know either. It's just money. Fancy word for giving donations to people. So he's sitting on the throne and everyone is looking up to him expectantly with hands outstretched because he's giving them money. So positivity. He's wanting to show himself as a positive person to the public. Different. This is the first one we've looked at that, like, he's literally distributing alms to the poor. Different light for an emperor. He's not demanding like that warrior respect that some of the others were doing. He is just wanting to be shown as a good person, but still using art for political purposes. But yeah. He also had a huge colossus of himself built, which is where we're going to pick up tomorrow. His colossus and his first church. And tomorrow we're also starting late antiquity, which is all about Christian art and pretty much Constantine's art. Tomorrow, bring your book. Bring your book tomorrow. Bring your book tomorrow, because tomorrow is your last practice round before you have to do your individual presentations. So tomorrow, bring your book. I'll bring 2 books tomorrow for anyone that might forget. But we are going to do something similar to what we did with the Etruscans and create a mini presentation and then talk about it. Yeah. So bring your book tomorrow. And like I said, we're going to start up here with the Colossus of Constantine and talk about his first church that he did as well. So I will see you all tomorrow. Sorry, it's a long one. Rome is like, once we get through this week, it's shorter stuff, I promise. So yeah, just bear with me for now. I realize how long it is. Trust me, I had to make it.
Thank you for class today.
Thanks, Greg. See you tomorrow.
See ya.